The house felt colder lately, though the thermostat read the same as always. Maybe it was the way Sarah looked at me, like I was a stranger she no longer cared to know. We'd been married 12 years, and for most of it, I thought we were happy. Sure, we argued sometimes, but who didn't? Sarah was my world. She was everything. My wife, my best friend, my partner in every sense of the word. Or so I thought. About 6 months ago, she landed a big promotion at work, one that came with longer hours, frequent travel, and a new level of stress that seemed to seep into every part of her life. At first, I chalked up the late nights and distracted conversations to the demands of her job. But slowly, little things began to bother me. She started guarding her phone more, flipping it screen side down, or keeping it in her purse. There were moments when her laughter, the kind that used to fill our house with warmth, felt forced and hollow. And then there was the perfume. Strong, expensive, and unfamiliar. She claimed it was a gift from a colleague, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. One evening, I suggested we go on a weekend getaway. Just the two of us. No phones, no distractions, just us. Sarah smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Maybe later, she said. Work's crazy right now. I tried to let it go. I told myself I was overthinking things, being paranoid. But when I found her sitting in the car one night, whispering into her phone with a smile I hadn't seen in months, my chest tightened. Who was that? I asked as casually as I could when she came inside. Work, she said too quickly. Just finalizing some details for the upcoming trip. Her explanation didn't sit right, but I let it slide. I didn't want to be the insecure husband, the guy who couldn't trust his wife. But the seeds of doubt were planted, and they grew roots I couldn't ignore. Weeks turned into months. Her work trips became more frequent, and the distance between us widened. I started to feel like a ghost in my own marriage, there, but unseen. I couldn't help but wonder, was there someone else? Was my wife, the woman I had vowed to spend my life with, betraying me? The thought gnawed at me, eating away at the foundation of trust we had built. And though I tried to convince myself otherwise, the truth was beginning to feel inevitable. I had to know. So, one morning, as Sarah kissed me goodbye and headed off to work, I followed her. It wasn't something I ever thought I'd do, but desperation makes you do things you never imagined. She didn't go to the office. Instead, she drove across town to a cafe, where a man I didn't recognize was waiting. They hugged, a little too closely, and sat down together, their heads bent in intimate conversation. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched from a distance. This wasn't a business meeting. This was personal. Too personal. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing with questions I wasn't sure I wanted the answers to. Who was he? How long had this been going on? And, most importantly, why? In that moment, I realized my life, the one I thought I knew, was falling apart, and I had no idea what to do next. After witnessing Sarah with the stranger, my drive home was a blur. The city streets I'd navigated 1,000 times felt unfamiliar, like I was in a dream, or maybe a nightmare. I parked in the driveway, but instead of going inside, I just sat there. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, my heart racing as my mind spiraled. Who was that man? Was he just a friend? A coworker? But the way they hugged, the closeness of it, that wasn't platonic. It couldn't be. The voice in my head kept telling me I was jumping to conclusions, but my gut knew better, and the ache in my chest was proof of that. The house was quiet when I finally walked in, too quiet. Normally, I'd hear Sarah bustling in the kitchen or humming to herself while folding laundry. But now, the silence felt oppressive, like it was pressing down on me, forcing me to confront what I'd just seen. I needed answers. But how? I couldn't just ask her outright. I didn't trust her to tell me the truth. No, I needed more than words. I needed proof. That night, as Sarah slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, the glow of the streetlight filtering through the curtains casting faint patterns on the walls. Her breathing was steady, peaceful, but mine was anything but. My thoughts churned, replaying every detail of what I'd seen that day, the way she smiled at him, the way he leaned in to whisper something that made her laugh. It felt like a betrayal just to remember it. I couldn't sit in the dark with my thoughts any longer. Carefully, I slid out of bed, making sure not to wake her, and crept downstairs. My laptop was on the dining table, right where I'd left it. I opened it, the screen's brightness momentarily blinding me in the dim room. My hands hovered over the keyboard. What was I even searching for? Her name? His? I didn't know who he was, or even how to start. But then I remembered her phone. She was always so careful with it lately, never leaving it unattended for long. But tonight, it was upstairs on the nightstand, right next to her. It was a risk, but I had to try. Back in the bedroom, the sound of Sarah's soft breathing filled the space. She was lying on her side, facing away from me, her hand draped over the edge of the bed. Her phone was within reach, but my pulse quickened at the thought of actually taking it. What if she woke up? What if she caught me? But the need for answers outweighed the fear. Slowly, carefully, I reached over her, holding my breath as I took the phone. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure it would wake her, but she didn't stir. I crept back downstairs, clutching the phone like it was a ticking bomb. When I unlocked it, I realized I didn't know her passcode. My stomach sank, but then I remembered. A few months ago, she'd asked me to look something up for her. She'd casually told me the code, her birthday. It was too simple to be real, but I typed it in anyway. The screen unlocked. I let out a shaky breath and started scrolling. Her text messages were mostly mundane, conversations with her mom, a group chat with her coworkers. But then I saw it. A thread with no name, just a phone number. The messages were brief, casual at first, but as I scrolled back through the weeks, they became intimate. Too intimate. One message from him read, "I can't wait to see you tomorrow. I've missed you so much." Another said, "I dream about you every night. You're all I think about, Sarah." My throat tightened. There was no denying it now. This wasn't just a harmless friendship or a misunderstanding. This was an affair. The texts from her were just as damning. Today was amazing. I feel so alive when I'm with you. Or worse, I hate leaving you, but I'll make it work. You're worth it. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. Everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my wife, my life, it was all a lie. Hours passed as I scrolled through their messages, piecing together the timeline of their relationship. It had started months ago, around the same time she got the promotion. At first, it seemed innocent, work-related, professional, but then it shifted. There were meetups, stolen weekends, late-night calls. And the worst part? The night of our anniversary, when I'd planned a romantic dinner, she claimed she couldn't attend because of work. She'd been with him. By the time the sun started to rise, I felt numb. I put her phone back where I'd found it and sat on the couch, staring blankly at the wall. The betrayal cut deeper than anything I'd ever experienced. I thought about confronting her right then and there, waking her up and demanding answers. But what would that accomplish? I wasn't ready for that conversation. Not yet. Over the next few days, I kept my distance. I went to work, came home, made small talk when necessary, but inside, I was seething. I started noticing every little thing she did, analyzing it for clues. Was she texting him now? Was she thinking about him while she smiled at me? It wasn't long before my curiosity turned into something darker. I needed more than just the messages. I needed to know where they went, what they did. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I started following her. Her routine was predictable. Work, gym, home. But every now and then, she'd have a meeting or work dinner that didn't quite add up. One night, when she said she was staying late to prepare for a big presentation, I decided to follow her again. She didn't go to the office. Instead, she drove to a hotel on the outskirts of town. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I watched her park and get out. Minutes later, the same man from the cafe arrived. They embraced, and she kissed him. A kiss that confirmed everything I already knew but still wasn't prepared to see. I stayed in the car, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The rage I felt was unlike anything I'd ever known. It wasn't just anger at her or him. It was anger at myself, for not seeing this sooner, for trusting her so completely. When she came home that night, I pretended to be asleep, but I wasn't. I lay there, my mind racing, my heart pounding. I wanted to confront her, to scream, to demand an explanation. But instead, I waited. Because now, I had a plan. This wasn't going to end with her walking away unscathed. I wouldn't let her destroy my life and get away with it. No, I was going to make sure she paid for what she'd done. To me, to our marriage, to the life we'd built together. She didn't know it yet, but everything was about to change. In the days following my discovery, I felt like I was living a double life. Outwardly, I maintained the facade of a husband going through the motions, making coffee, asking about Sarah's day, sharing space at the dinner table. But inside, I was a storm, a swirling mix of rage, sorrow, and disbelief. Every smile she gave me, every casual laugh or affectionate touch, felt like a dagger. I couldn't decide what hurt more, the betrayal or the fact that she thought I was too blind to see it. I started watching her closely, noticing things I'd never paid attention to before. She was careful. I'd give her that. Her lies were woven seamlessly into the fabric of her day-to-day life. She'd mention a late meeting or a last-minute work dinner with such casualness that it almost seemed believable. But now I knew better. She'd hum softly while she cooked dinner, glancing at her phone with a faint smile. Was it him? Did he make her laugh like that? When she left for her morning run, I couldn't help but wonder if she was really going for a jog, or if she was sneaking in a quick phone call. One evening, I decided to test her. As we sat together on the couch, I casually asked, "How's work been lately? You seem busier than usual." She glanced at me, her smile unflinching. "Oh, it's been insane. The new project has everyone scrambling. Late nights, early mornings. It's been exhausting." Her tone was so convincing I almost doubted what I knew. Almost. "What about your team? Are they pitching in? Or is it all falling on you?" I asked, keeping my voice light. "They're great," she replied without hesitation. "Especially Marcus and Claire. They've really stepped up. I'm lucky to have them." Her mention of colleagues I knew by name was calculated, a way to ground her lie in something familiar. But the man I'd seen her with wasn't Marcus, and it definitely wasn't Claire. Her words were nothing but smoke and mirrors. The following Friday, she announced she had to work late again. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "Anything exciting?" I asked. "Just the usual grind," she replied, kissing my cheek before she left. I waited 10 minutes before grabbing my jacket and keys. Tonight, I wouldn't just follow her. I'd gather evidence. I trailed her car at a safe distance, my heart pounding in my chest. She drove across town, taking the same route I'd seen her take before, until she pulled into the parking lot of a boutique hotel. The sight of her stepping out of the car, her figure illuminated by the glow of the parking lot lights, filled me with a mix of heartbreak and fury. She wasn't meeting him in secret anymore. She wasn't even trying to hide it. The man arrived shortly after, pulling up in a sleek black sedan. He stepped out, dressed in a sharp suit, and greeted her with a warm embrace. She melted into his arms like she belonged there, and they walked into the hotel together. I parked a few spaces away and took out my phone. The camera lens trembled as I zoomed in, snapping photo after photo. The evidence was damning, clear, undeniable proof of her betrayal. For a moment, I considered confronting them right there in the lobby. The image of their shocked faces was satisfying to imagine, but I wasn't ready to give up my leverage. Not yet. I spent the weekend crafting my plan. If Sarah thought she could humiliate me, if she thought she could waltz through life without consequences, she was sorely mistaken. I'd spent years building a life for us, and I wasn't about to let her tear it apart without paying the price. I met with a lawyer on Monday morning. The man was sharp, efficient, and brutally honest. "This is going to be messy," he said, flipping through the photos and texts I'd printed out. "But with what you've got here, you have a strong case. If she's been funneling money into this relationship or spending marital funds, we can go after that too." Hearing him outline the potential outcomes was oddly soothing. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had some measure of control. That evening, I returned home to find Sarah already there. She was in the kitchen, pouring a glass of wine, and greeted me with a smile. "How was your day?" she asked, as if nothing was amiss. "It was fine," I replied, my voice steady. "What about yours?" "Busy, as usual," she said, sipping her wine. "But things should calm down soon." Her lies were becoming easier to spot, like cracks in a polished surface. But I played along, nodding and pretending to care about the mundane details of her fabricated day. After dinner, as we sat watching TV, I couldn't help but study her. She seemed so at ease, so comfortable in her deception. I wondered if she ever felt guilty or if the thrill of her affair had drowned out any sense of shame. The next morning, I decided to confront her, just enough to let her know the game was up. As she sipped her coffee, I casually slid one of the photos across the table. Her reaction was immediate. The color drained from her face, and her hand froze mid-air. "What? What is this?" she stammered. "You tell me," I said evenly. "I followed you, Sarah. I saw everything." She looked down at the photo, her hands trembling. "It's not what you think," she began, but her voice faltered. "Don't insult me by lying again," I said, my tone sharp. "I know about the texts. The hotel. Him." Her eyes welled up with tears, and for a moment, I thought I saw genuine regret. But then her expression hardened. "So what?" she snapped. "Maybe if you weren't so distant, I wouldn't have needed someone else." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Distant?" I repeated, incredulous. "I've been here for you every step of the way. I've supported you, trusted you, loved you. And this is how you repay me?" She stood, her chair scraping against the floor. "You don't understand," she said, her voice rising. "You don't know what it's like to feel invisible, to feel like your needs don't matter. And you think cheating fixes that?" I shot back, my voice shaking with anger. She opened her mouth to respond but stopped, as if realizing there was no justification she could offer that would make this okay. "I trusted you," I said quietly, my voice breaking. "I gave you everything, and you threw it all away." She looked at me, tears streaming down her face, but I didn't feel sympathy, only a cold, hollow ache where my love for her used to be. "I'm filing for divorce," I said, standing up, "and I'll make sure you don't walk away with anything you don't deserve." Her expression crumbled, but I didn't wait to hear her response. I walked out of the room, leaving her standing there, her tears and excuses falling on deaf ears. The game was over. After dropping the divorce bombshell, I left Sarah in the kitchen and retreated to the bedroom. I needed space, both physically and emotionally, to process what had just happened. The moment had played out exactly as I'd envisioned, but instead of feeling victorious, I felt empty. My eyes landed on the framed wedding photo on the dresser. Sarah's smile was so wide, so genuine in that picture, it made my chest tighten. I remembered how we danced under the stars that night, laughing like there was no tomorrow. Back then, I never would have imagined our future could unravel like this. But here we were. I had to remind myself that this wasn't just about the betrayal. It was about the lies, the manipulation, the complete disregard for the life we'd built together. Any lingering feelings of guilt or nostalgia were quickly swallowed by anger. Sarah had made her choice, and now it was my turn to make mine. The next day, I began taking steps to secure my future. First, I called my lawyer, giving him the green light to file the divorce papers. He assured me that with the evidence I had, I'd have a strong case for a favorable settlement. Next, I started compiling a list of assets. Our house, joint accounts, investments, everything we owned together. I didn't want to leave anything to chance. If Sarah thought she could cheat her way into taking half of everything, she was in for a rude awakening. I also made an appointment with a financial advisor. "I want to protect what's mine," I told her firmly. "My retirement savings, my business income, everything." She nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "We'll create a strategy to ensure your assets are secure," she said. "Do you suspect she's been hiding anything?" "I wouldn't put it past her," I admitted. Meanwhile, Sarah had gone quiet. She stayed out of my way, barely speaking to me unless it was necessary. I wasn't sure if it was guilt or defiance, but either way, her silence was unnerving. I caught her glancing at me a few times, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. Regret, fear, or maybe just the realization that her carefully constructed web of lies was collapsing. One evening, as I sat in the living room reviewing documents, she approached me. Her arms were crossed, her posture defensive. "Can we talk?" she asked softly. I didn't look up. "What's there to talk about?" "Everything," she said, her voice trembling. I know I hurt you. I know I messed up, but I still love you, and I want to fix this. I laughed bitterly, finally meeting her gaze. Fix this? You think you can undo 2 years of lies and betrayal with a few words? It wasn't 2 years, she blurted out, her face flushing. The slip-up was glaring. My jaw clenched as I set down the papers. So how long was it, Sarah? 5 years? 10? Her silence spoke volumes. Unbelievable, I muttered, shaking my head. You've been lying for so long you can't even keep your story straight. Tears welled up in her eyes. I made a mistake, she pleaded. I was lonely and No, I cut her off. You don't get to play the victim here. You didn't just make a mistake, Sarah. You made a choice. Over and over again. You chose to betray me. And now you want sympathy? She wiped her face, but I didn't feel any pity. I was too far gone for that. Please, she whispered. We can go to counseling. We can. I stood abruptly, towering over her. Stop, I said firmly. We're not going to counseling. We're not going to fix this. You destroyed us, Sarah. There's no coming back from that. Her shoulders sagged as if the weight of my words had physically crushed her. But I didn't feel any satisfaction, just exhaustion. In the days that followed, I focused on taking control of my life. I moved my personal belongings into the guest room and told Sarah to stay out of my way. She obeyed, retreating into her own world while I prepared for the inevitable fallout. I started telling a few close friends and family members about the divorce. Their reactions varied: shock, anger, disbelief. But one thing was consistent. They all supported my decision. My brother, Mike, was especially vocal. Good riddance, he said when I told him. She didn't deserve you. Thanks, Mike, I muttered, though his words felt hollow. I mean it, he insisted. You've been bending over backward for her for years, and this is how she repays you? Screw her. I nodded, though the bitterness in his voice mirrored the emotions I was trying to suppress. One afternoon, while Sarah was out, I decided to pack up her things. It wasn't an act of pettiness, it was practicality. I didn't want her lingering in our home, surrounded by reminders of a life she'd chosen to destroy. As I sorted through her belongings, I found little mementos of our life together. Ticket stubs from concerts we'd attended, anniversary cards filled with sweet words, photos of us smiling like we had the world at our feet. Each item felt like a punch to the gut, a reminder of what I thought we had. Then, at the bottom of one drawer, I found a small box. Inside was a necklace I'd given her for our 5th anniversary, a delicate silver chain with a heart-shaped pendant. She hadn't worn it in years, and now I wondered if it was because she'd associated it with me, or because she'd replaced it with something from him. That evening, Sarah came home to find her belongings neatly packed into boxes stacked in the living room. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, I saw the shock register. "What's this?" she asked, her voice wavering. "It's time for you to go," I said simply. "Go where?" she asked, panic creeping into her tone. "I don't care," I replied, my voice cold. "But you're not staying here. I've already spoken to my lawyer. The papers will be ready soon." She looked at me, her face pale. "You're really doing this," she whispered. "You're throwing me out?" "I'm not throwing you out," I said. "You threw yourself out the moment you decided to cheat." She stared at me, tears streaming down her face. But I didn't flinch. I was done being manipulated by her emotions. "I hope he was worth it," I added, my voice hard. "Because you're about to lose everything." As I watched her pack the last of her things into her car, I felt an odd mix of emotions: anger, relief, sadness. Part of me wanted to yell, to cry, to demand answers. But another part of me just wanted her gone, to reclaim my space and my sanity. When she finally drove away, the silence that followed was deafening. The house felt emptier than ever, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of peace. It wasn't over yet. There was still the legal battle ahead, still the fallout to navigate. But as I stood there in the quiet, I realized I'd taken the first step toward reclaiming my life. And for the first time, I felt like I might actually be okay. The house felt cavernous after Sarah left, like the walls had stretched and grown, leaving me adrift in my own home. Her scent lingered faintly, intertwined with the fabric of the curtains and the cushions of the couch, but I tried to ignore it. I refused to let her ghost haunt me. It was time to reclaim my space, my life, and to start piecing together the shattered remnants of my reality. The first thing I did was strip the bed. I couldn't stand the thought of sleeping where we once shared intimate moments, now poisoned by the knowledge of her betrayal. The sheets went straight into the trash, and I replaced them with a set I picked out that afternoon. Standing in the bedding aisle at the store, I was struck by how surreal the moment felt, choosing new linens for a life I hadn't asked for. The small things were what got to me. Picking a color, wondering what would look good without considering her opinion, reminded me of just how much my identity had become entangled with hers. For years, I'd let her preferences guide so many of my decisions. Now, I was left with the daunting task of rediscovering what I liked, who I was. In the days that followed, I threw myself into reclaiming the house. I reorganized the kitchen, moved furniture, and donated items I associated with her. The wedding photos came down first, followed by the framed pictures of us on vacations, laughing and holding hands. I boxed them up and shoved them into the darkest corner of the attic, unsure if I'd ever be able to look at them again. But there was one thing I couldn't bring myself to remove: the picture of us with her parents and mine, taken the day we announced our engagement. Everyone looked so happy, so full of hope for our future. I stared at it for what felt like hours, trying to reconcile the woman in the photo with the person who had so easily lied to me. Finally, I placed the photo face down on the table and walked away. Work became my sanctuary. It gave me structure, something to pour my energy into when my thoughts threatened to spiral. My coworkers noticed the change in me, but I avoided their questions. I wasn't ready to explain what had happened. The wounds were still too fresh, the humiliation too raw. But one person refused to let it slide: my friend Matt. We'd been close since college, and he had an uncanny ability to see through my walls. One afternoon, he cornered me in the break room, his arms crossed and a concerned look on his face. "All right, man," he said, leaning against the counter. "Spill. What's going on with you?" I hesitated, debating whether to tell him the truth. Part of me wanted to keep it all bottled up, to deal with it alone. But another part, the part that was drowning, knew I needed help. "It's Sarah," I admitted finally, my voice low. "She cheated. For 2 years, at least." Matt's face darkened. "You're kidding me." I shook my head. "I wish I was." "What the hell, man?" he said, his tone a mix of anger and disbelief. "I thought you two were solid." "So did I replied bitterly. Turns out I was wrong. He didn't say anything for a moment, just stared at me like he was trying to process it. Finally, he clapped a hand on my shoulder. "Look, if you need anything, just say the word. Drinks, a place to crash, whatever. I've got your back." "Thanks," I said, meaning it. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of something resembling hope. As the weeks turned into months, I began to adjust to life without Sarah. The divorce proceedings were slow and draining, but I stayed focused on the end goal: freedom. My lawyer kept me updated, and every time I reviewed another document or signed another form, I felt a step closer to putting this chapter behind me. Sarah, meanwhile, tried to reach out a few times. She sent texts and left voicemails, each one more desperate than the last. At first, I ignored them. I didn't owe her anything, not after what she'd done. But one night, curiosity got the better of me, and I listened to one of her messages. "Please, can we just talk?" her voice pleaded through the phone. "I know I messed up, but I don't want it to end like this. I still love you." I deleted the message without responding. Love? If she truly loved me, she wouldn't have thrown away our marriage for some fleeting affair. Her words were empty, a desperate attempt to salvage the life she'd so carelessly destroyed. One evening, I decided to go through the boxes of Sarah's belongings that I hadn't yet dealt with. They were stacked in the corner of the guest room, a physical reminder of the life we'd shared. I opened one and began sorting through its contents: clothes, books, trinkets she'd collected over the years. Then, at the bottom of one box, I found a journal. My breath caught as I picked it up, its worn leather cover familiar. Sarah had always loved writing, and she used to keep journals filled with her thoughts, dreams, and reflections. This one, though, was different. It was newer, the pages crisp and clean. I shouldn't have opened it. I knew that. But curiosity got the better of me. The first few entries were innocuous, filled with mundane details about her day-to-day life. But as I flipped through the pages, I found entries about him. Her lover. She described their meetings, her feelings of guilt and excitement, the thrill of sneaking around. One entry, in particular, stopped me cold. "I know what I'm doing is wrong," she had written, "but I can't stop. With him, I feel alive in a way I haven't in years. It's not that I don't love James, I do, but sometimes it feels like we're just going through the motions. I need more." I slammed the journal shut, my hands trembling. Alive? She felt alive while she was destroying me? That was the moment I decided I couldn't let her have any more power over me. The journal went into the trash, along with the rest of the box. I was done reliving the pain. One day, my lawyer called with good news. The divorce was finalized. I was officially free. The weight I'd been carrying for months suddenly felt lighter, as if the chains around my chest had been broken. That evening, I poured myself a glass of whiskey and sat on the back porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. For the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to feel a glimmer of hope. My life wasn't over. It was just different. The road ahead was still uncertain, but one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let Sarah, or anyone else, define my worth. I had a lot of healing to do, but I was ready to take the first step. The first few weeks after the divorce became official felt surreal. I kept expecting Sarah to walk through the door with that breezy air of hers, acting as if nothing had happened. But she didn't. The house was mine now, and the silence that once felt oppressive began to feel like freedom. For the first time in years, I could breathe without the weight of suspicion or betrayal on my shoulders. I started spending more time outdoors. There was something grounding about being in nature, where life didn't care about your heartbreak or your failures. The trails behind my house, which I'd neglected for years, became my escape. I'd walk for hours, the crunch of leaves underfoot and the rustling of the trees providing a kind of therapy I hadn't realized I needed. One day, while hiking, I stumbled upon a clearing I'd never noticed before. The grass was tall, swaying gently in the breeze, and the sunlight filtered through the trees in golden beams. I stood there for a while, just listening to the birds and feeling the sun on my skin. It was the most peaceful I'd felt in months. That evening, I decided to start journaling, a practice Sarah used to swear by, though I'd always dismissed it as sentimental nonsense. But as I sat at the kitchen table, pen in hand, the words began to flow. At first, it was just raw emotion, a torrent of anger, sadness, and confusion spilling onto the page. But as the days went on, my writing shifted. I started reflecting on who I was before Sarah, the person I'd lost along the way. It was like reacquainting myself with an old friend. Work provided another anchor. I threw myself into projects, volunteering for tasks I'd normally avoid just to stay busy. My boss noticed the change and offered me a promotion, a chance to lead a new division the company was launching. "You've got the drive," he said during our meeting, "and we need someone who can take charge. Think about it." The offer was tempting, but I hesitated. It wasn't that I doubted my abilities. I knew I could handle the role, but taking on more responsibility meant less time for the personal growth I was just beginning to embrace. Still, the idea of stepping into something new, something challenging, was appealing. After a weekend of deliberation, I accepted the promotion. It felt like the right step forward, a chance to redefine not just my career but also myself. One evening, Matt convinced me to join him at a local bar. "You need to get out," he said. "Have a drink, meet some people. It's time." I wasn't sure I was ready for the social scene, but Matt was persistent. The bar was crowded, filled with the hum of conversation and bursts of laughter. It felt strange to be there without Sarah, navigating the world as a single man for the first time in over a decade. Matt introduced me to a few of his friends, and we spent the night talking and laughing over beers. For a few hours, I forgot about the heaviness I'd been carrying. I even caught the attention of a woman across the bar, a brunette with bright eyes and an easy smile. She waved when our eyes met, and Matt nudged me with a grin. "Go talk to her," he urged. I hesitated, but after a few moments, I walked over. Her name was Claire, and she was funny, smart, and refreshingly straightforward. We talked for a while, and when the night ended, she gave me her number. I didn't call Claire right away. The thought of diving into a new relationship felt overwhelming, like running before I'd learned to walk again. But the interaction reminded me that life didn't have to stop because Sarah had betrayed me. There was a world beyond the pain, and I was beginning to see glimpses of it. In the meantime, I focused on myself. I joined a gym, started cooking meals from scratch, and even picked up an old hobby I hadn't touched in years: woodworking. The garage became my workshop, a space where I could lose myself in the rhythm of sanding, cutting, and assembling. I built a coffee table, then a bookshelf, each project a tangible reminder that I was capable of creating something solid, something lasting. One afternoon, while organizing some papers in the office, I came across an envelope I'd forgotten about. It was from Sarah, something she'd left behind during the divorce proceedings. Inside was a handwritten letter. I debated whether to read it. Part of me wanted to toss it into the trash, but curiosity won out. The letter was long, filled with apologies and explanations I didn't want or need. But one line stuck out: "I'll never forgive myself for what I did to you, and I hope someday you can find it in your heart to move on." I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. I didn't feel anger or sadness, just a quiet sense of closure. Sarah's choices had shattered our life together, but they didn't have to define mine. The promotion at work turned out to be exactly what I needed. The challenges kept me sharp, and the sense of accomplishment was invigorating. My team respected me, and I started to build something new, something that felt entirely mine. Claire and I went out for coffee a few weeks later. She was easy to talk to, and while I wasn't ready to jump into anything serious, I appreciated her company. She understood where I was coming from, never pushing me for more than I was willing to give. "Take your time," she said with a smile. "I'm not in a rush." Months passed, and the wounds Sarah left began to heal. They didn't disappear completely, scars never do, but they became a part of me, a reminder of what I'd survived. The man staring back at me in the mirror wasn't the same as the one from a year ago. He was stronger, wiser, and more resilient. One evening, as I sat on the back porch with a glass of whiskey, I looked out at the clearing in the woods. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and that was enough. The sense of peace I'd found on the back porch that evening was fragile, but it was real. For the first time in months, I felt like I had control of my life again. Yet, freedom comes with a price. The need to rebuild, to redefine who you are when everything you thought you knew about yourself and your future has been torn apart. The weeks that followed were filled with small victories. I started sleeping better, no longer jolting awake in the middle of the night with Sarah's betrayal replaying in my mind. My appetite returned, and I began to enjoy cooking again. Not just quick meals to fill the silence, but real meals, with fresh ingredients and a sense of purpose. I even began experimenting with dishes Sarah used to love, reclaiming them as my own. The house was also beginning to feel less like a mausoleum of memories and more like a sanctuary. The changes I'd made, the new linens, the rearranged furniture, the personal touches I'd added, gave the space a different energy. It was no longer our home. It was mine. One day, as I sorted through some old boxes in the garage, I came across a collection of photographs from the early years of my marriage. There we were, smiling on vacations, celebrating birthdays, hosting friends for dinner. Each photo felt like a punch to the gut, a reminder of what I'd lost, or maybe what I'd never truly had. At the bottom of the stack was a photo of Sarah and me on our honeymoon. We were sitting on a beach, the ocean stretching out behind us, and her head was resting on my shoulder. In that moment, I had been so certain of our love, of the life we were building together. I stared at the photo for a long time before placing it in a box marked storage. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away, but I also couldn't bear to look at it anymore. It belonged to a chapter of my life that was over. Work continued to be a lifeline. The new role kept me busy, and my team quickly became a source of pride. Leading the division wasn't just about the work itself. It was about proving to myself that I could rise above the chaos and build something successful. Every milestone we hit, every project we completed, felt like another brick in the foundation of my new life. One evening, my boss called me into his office. "You've been doing great work, James," he said, leaning back in his chair. "The team respects you, and the results speak for themselves." "Thanks," I replied, surprised by the compliment. "I've been thinking," he continued. "We've got an opportunity coming up, a partnership with a firm overseas. It's a big deal, and I want you to lead it." The proposal was unexpected, and my mind raced. It would mean traveling abroad for several months, immersing myself in a challenging project, and stepping even further out of my comfort zone. "You don't have to decide right away," he said. "Take some time to think about it." That night, as I sat on the couch with a glass of wine, I thought about the opportunity. It was exactly the kind of challenge I would have jumped at before everything fell apart. But now, the idea of leaving my newfound stability was daunting. Could I handle being away from home, away from the routine I'd worked so hard to establish? I decided to call Matt. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey man," I said, "got a minute?" "For you?" "Always," he replied. "What's up?" I told him about the offer and my hesitations. Matt listened, then said, "Look, I get it. You've been through the ringer, and the idea of taking on something this big probably feels overwhelming. But you're stronger than you think, James. You've already proved that." "Have I?" I asked, my voice laced with doubt. "Hell yeah, you have," he said firmly. "You could have let what happened with Sarah destroy you, but you didn't. You rebuilt your life, piece by piece. If you can do that, you can handle anything." His words stuck with me long after we hung up. Maybe he was right. Maybe this was exactly what I needed. A chance to step out of the shadow of my past and into a future I could shape on my own terms. A week later, I told my boss I was in. Preparations for the project began immediately, and before I knew it, I was boarding a plane for the first leg of my journey. As the aircraft climbed into the sky, I felt a strange mix of excitement and nervousness. This was a leap into the unknown, but it was my leap. The overseas assignment turned out to be both challenging and rewarding. The work was intense, but it pushed me to grow in ways I hadn't anticipated. I met new people, experienced a different culture, and rediscovered a sense of curiosity and wonder that had been buried under years of routine and heartbreak. One evening, after a long day of meetings, I found myself wandering through a bustling market. The air was filled with the scent of spices and the sound of vendors calling out to passers-by. I stopped at a small stall selling handmade journals and picked one up, running my fingers over the embossed cover. "Write your story," the vendor said with a smile, handing me a pen. His words stayed with me as I made my way back to my hotel. That night, I opened the journal and began writing. Not about Sarah, not about the past, but about the person I was becoming. By the time I returned home, months later, I felt like a different man. The weight I'd been carrying since the divorce had lessened, replaced by a newfound sense of purpose. My house, which had once felt empty and cold, now felt like a refuge, a place where I could continue to build the life I wanted. Claire and I stayed in touch while I was away. She'd sent the occasional text or email, never pushing but always reminding me that she was there. When I got back, she suggested we meet for coffee, and I agreed. Seeing her again was like a breath of fresh air. She was easy to talk to, and for the first time, I allowed myself to entertain the possibility of something more. I wasn't ready to dive headfirst into a relationship, but I wasn't afraid to take small steps toward one either. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I had scars, yes, but they were a testament to my resilience, a reminder that I had survived the worst and come out stronger. As I sat on the back porch one evening, watching the sun set over the trees, I realized that I wasn't just rebuilding my life. I was rediscovering myself, and for the first time in a long time, I felt whole. The months after my return were a strange mix of familiarity and newness. Coming back to my house, my routines, and my old life felt like slipping into a pair of well-worn shoes. But I wasn't the same man who had left, and my life wasn't the same either. Claire and I started spending more time together. She had a warmth and openness that made it easy to let my guard down, and she didn't pressure me to move faster than I was comfortable with. We took things slow. Coffee dates turned into hikes, which turned into dinners at home. It felt good to have someone by my side again, even if I wasn't ready to call it love just yet. Meanwhile, my career was thriving. The success of the overseas project earned me a lot of respect within the company, and my boss hinted at even bigger opportunities on the horizon. For the first time in years, I felt like I was building something solid, something that was entirely my own. One rainy afternoon, as I worked on a new bookshelf in my garage, I heard the sound of tires crunching on gravel. Looking out the window, I froze. It was Sarah's car. She stepped out, holding an umbrella, and stood there for a moment, as if summoning the courage to approach. I hadn't seen her in nearly a year, and the sight of her stirred a mix of emotions I wasn't prepared for: anger, pity, and a faint trace of the love I'd once felt. "What do you want, Sarah?" I asked when she knocked on the garage door. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice tentative. "Just for a few minutes." Against my better judgment, I let her in. She looked thinner, her face drawn with stress, and her once perfect posture seemed weighed down by something invisible. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," she began, "for everything. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I needed you to hear that." Her apology caught me off guard. Part of me wanted to lash out, to remind her of everything she'd destroyed. But another part of me, the part that had been working so hard to heal, knew that holding on to anger would only hurt me more. "I appreciate that," I said simply, "but it doesn't change anything." She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I just hope you're happy," she whispered. "I am," I said, and for the first time, I realized it was true. Sarah's visit stirred up old memories, but it also solidified something important. I had moved on. She no longer had a hold on me, and her regret wasn't my burden to carry. Claire and I grew closer as the months passed. She was patient and kind, never pushing me to open up before I was ready. One night, as we sat on the porch watching the stars, she reached over and took my hand. "You don't have to say anything," she said softly, "but I need you to know that I'm here, for as long as you'll have me." Her words broke something open in me. For the first time since my world had fallen apart, I allowed myself to feel the possibility of a future, not just for me, but for us. Claire and I began building a life together. She moved in gradually, bringing her things over piece by piece, until one day it just made sense for her to stay. It wasn't like my life with Sarah. This was a partnership built on honesty and trust. We made decisions together, talked openly about our fears and dreams, and supported each other in ways I hadn't known were possible. I also started volunteering at a local woodworking class, teaching kids how to build small projects. It was rewarding in a way I hadn't anticipated, and it reminded me of the joy I'd found in creating something with my hands. One afternoon, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Sarah. She'd written to tell me she was leaving town, moving to another state to start fresh. She thanked me for the years we'd shared and apologized again for the pain she'd caused. Reading her words, I felt a pang of sadness, but it was overshadowed by relief. Her departure was like the final chapter of a book I'd been stuck in for too long. That evening, I burned the letter in the fire pit out back, watching as the flames consumed it. It felt like a symbolic gesture, a way of letting go of the past once and for all. Claire's birthday came around, and I decided to surprise her with a weekend getaway. We drove to a small cabin by the lake, spending our days hiking and our nights sitting by the fire, talking about everything and nothing. On the last night, as the stars reflected off the still water, I told her I loved her. The words felt both terrifying and freeing, like stepping off a cliff and realizing you could fly. Her smile lit up the darkness, and she leaned in to kiss me. "I love you too," she whispered. Over time, the life Claire and I built together became something I cherished deeply. It wasn't perfect, no life is, but it was real, and it was ours. We made plans for the future, from small things like renovating the kitchen to big dreams of traveling together. I'd stopped thinking of myself as the man who'd been betrayed and started thinking of myself as someone who had overcome. The scars were still there, but they were a part of my story, not the whole of it. On the anniversary of my divorce, I found myself sitting on the back porch again, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The house, once a symbol of pain and loss, now felt like home. Claire joined me, handing me a cup of coffee, and we sat in comfortable silence, her head resting on my shoulder. As I looked out at the clearing in the woods, I realized how far I'd come. The man who had been broken by betrayal was gone, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. My life wasn't what I'd planned, but it was good. And for the first time in years, I felt at peace.